It was a rainy Thursday morning in the quiet town of Elmswood. The clouds hung low, pressing down on the steeple of the old stone chapel nestled near the woods, where a small crowd had gathered for the funeral of Mr. Elias Carter, an elderly man known for living alone in a faded blue farmhouse at the edge of town. No one had known him well. He was quiet, polite, and mostly kept to himself. His only companion had been a golden-coated mixed-breed dog named Rufus, who followed him everywhere like a shadow. And now, as mourners sat under umbrellas, Rufus sat stiffly near the casket at the front of the chapel, his eyes fixed and ears alert. It was the dog's behavior that began to unsettle the few who attended. At first, Rufus simply stood. Then, as the priest, Father Bernard, began his eulogy, something strange happened. Rufus started growling, not a confused whimper or a soft protest, but a deep, guttural growl that echoed under the vaulted ceilings of the chapel. All eyes turned toward the dog. Father Bernard paused, clearly distracted, but continued reading the passage about eternal rest and forgiveness. Then Rufus let out a single sharp bark, loud and jarring. The priest visibly flinched, losing his place in the scripture. The air grew tense. A man in the third pew leaned toward the widow of the deceased's brother and whispered, "Why is the dog barking like that?" "What's wrong?" The old woman only shook her head, her fingers clenching her rosary tighter. The priest wiped his brow. He looked nervous now. His voice trembled slightly. Rufus barked again, this time stepping forward toward the coffin, his nails clicking on the chapel floor. No one stopped him. The dog stood directly in front of the polished mahogany casket and began circling it, tail stiff, eyes never blinking. Then he sat and howled, a long, aching, almost human howl. Father Bernard tried to continue, but stopped again. His hands trembled, the Bible slipping slightly from his grip. Then someone stood. Detective Marshal Gaines, a retired investigator who had known Elias Carter briefly during a small property dispute years ago, stepped forward and spoke clearly. "Father, you seem shaken. Is something wrong?" The question hung in the air like thunder. The priest blinked rapidly. No, of course not. It's just the weather. It's unsettling, and the dog, he's clearly grieving." But his words didn't match his face. There was sweat above his brow despite the cold. His eyes darted to the casket, then back to the dog, then the crowd. Rufus barked again, standing now, pawing the base of the coffin. Something was wrong, undeniably wrong. Detective Gaines stepped closer to Rufus and knelt down, examining the dog's behavior. The dog looked at him and gave a soft whine before placing a paw on the latch of the coffin. "I want to open it," Gaines said quietly. Gasps echoed around the room. Father Bernard nearly dropped his Bible. "No, you can't do that. This is a consecrated ceremony, a sacred time." "But something isn't right," Gaines said, his eyes narrowing. "And this dog knows something." The funeral director hesitated, but was overruled by the sudden collective sense of unease in the room. The chapel fell silent as Gaines reached for the casket's latch. The lock had already been loosened. He opened the casket. More gasps, but not because the body inside looked wrong. It was Elias Carter. Pale, peaceful, except for one odd thing. His hand was clenching something, tight, too tight for a corpse in rigor mortis. Gaines gently pried it open. Inside was a small piece of paper. On it were words written in shaking, scribbled letters. "Not dead. Poisoned. The priest." The rest of the note was smudged with blood. Chaos erupted. Rufus began barking uncontrollably. People backed away. Father Bernard turned pale as a sheet, stepping back so fast he tripped over a pew and nearly fell. But before anyone could stop him, he dashed for the chapel's side exit. Gaines ran after him. The priest didn't get far. Minutes later, under the pewter sky, police vehicles filled the chapel parking lot. Father Bernard was handcuffed beside a cruiser, head hung low. Inside his coat pocket, officers found a vial containing traces of digitalis, a deadly plant-based poison. It didn't take long for the truth to unravel. Elias Carter had been growing suspicious of the priest, who had been siphoning donations meant for the local orphanage. When Elias discovered forged financial documents, somehow overlooked by the diocese auditors, he'd arranged to meet with a lawyer. But before he could, he fell mysteriously ill. He had just enough strength left to scribble that note, and hope that his most loyal companion could do the rest, and Rufus had. The story exploded across national news. Hero Dog exposes Killer Priest at Owner's Funeral. Headlines screamed. People across the country sent treats, letters, and offers to adopt Rufus. But Detective Gaines decided the dog belonged in the department as an honorary member, and Rufus was officially sworn in as a K-9 partner. But that wasn't the end. A month later, Gaines received a package. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a note. Elias wasn't the only one. There are more. Ask yourself, why was the priest so afraid of being found out by a dog? That night, Gaines sat in his dimly lit study, watching the contents of the drive. What he saw made his stomach twist. Videos, dozens of them. Hidden camera footage of closed-door church meetings. Clerical figures speaking in code. Mentions of other elderly residents. Unusual deaths. Every victim had something in common. Each had recently updated a will to donate money to the church. Elias had only been the latest. The dog had unearthed not just a murder, but a conspiracy stretching beyond Elmswood. And as Gaines looked at Rufus, peacefully curled up beside him, he asked the question that now haunted him deeply. If a dog could sniff out murder, how many other secrets are hiding beneath the surface, just waiting for someone to listen? The air in Elmswood was no longer still. Ever since the shocking events at the chapel, the dogs barking, the confession forced by a dead man's last note, and the exposure of Father Bernard's dark secrets, the entire town felt the ripples of something deep and disturbing. But for Detective Gaines, the unearthed truth was just the beginning. That night, in the pale glow of his study lamp, he played the mysterious USB again, the videos flickering like ghosts on the screen. Gaines sat motionless. Rufus lay at his feet, his body curled, but ears twitching slightly with each sound the computer made. The detective's eyes scanned each frame carefully. Clergymen in robes spoke in hushed tones in poorly lit rooms. Names were whispered, ledgers were shown. One name caught his attention. Abigail Wren, a retired nurse, 76 years old. She had died last year, quietly, her will leaving a sizable portion to the very same orphanage Father Bernard supported. The official cause, stroke. But her neighbor had mentioned to Gaines once that Abigail was strong, healthy, and active for her age. Her death had seemed sudden, unnatural. Another video, a different name. Mr. Leonard Hale, also elderly, also left money to the church, also died under mysterious circumstances, his body cremated before a coroner could be consulted. Gaines leaned back in his chair. A pattern was forming. The priest had been part of a web, not a lone spider, and Rufus, unintentionally or not, had exposed the first thread. The detective spent the next few days combing through town records, death certificates, and donation logs. The list grew. 13 elderly individuals in the past 6 years had died suddenly after donating to the orphanage fund. The same notary had signed their updated wills. The same caretaker had handled post-death arrangements, and strangely, in each case, Father Bernard had been the one to deliver the final rites, even when the families lived outside of Elmswood. On the 5th day of his investigation, Gaines received a knock on his door. It was late. He opened it cautiously. A young woman stood outside, her hair soaked from the drizzle, her eyes red. She introduced herself as Natalie Burke, granddaughter of Walter Burke, the most recent name Gaines had added to his list. "My grandfather didn't just die," she said, her voice trembling. "He told me days before he passed that he suspected someone was watching him. He said he changed his will last month after a priest visited him in the hospital. I didn't think much of it then. But now," Gaines invited her inside. As she sat down, Rufus approached her slowly, sniffed, then gently laid his head on her lap. Natalie began crying quietly. "He used to love dogs," she whispered. "Said they could see people for who they truly were." Gaines shared what he had found, the videos, the connections, the corruption. Together they agreed to exhume Walter's body. Natalie gave consent as his next of kin. It was a risky move, one that could stir the town into panic. But they needed evidence. The following week, under the dim light of early dawn, Walter Burke's body was exhumed. The results confirmed their worst fears. Toxicology revealed high levels of belladonna, a poison almost untraceable unless specifically tested for. The coroner's eyes widened. This wasn't natural. It was murder. And now it was official. Gaines handed the growing case file over to the State Attorney General's office. The investigation spread beyond Elmswood. Other towns, other churches, other names. What was once thought to be an isolated act of desperation by a corrupt priest now appeared to be part of a nationwide network, a twisted syndicate that preyed on the elderly under the guise of spiritual comfort. The FBI got involved. Indictments were issued. Arrests were made. But through it all, the story of Rufus, the loyal dog who barked at a funeral, remained at the center. He became a symbol of justice, of loyalty, of the innocent seeing what humans could not. National news outlets picked up the story again. Talk shows invited Gaines and Rufus. Children sent letters. A bronze statue was erected in the Elmswood town square. Rufus, poised and proud, standing over a casket, immortalized in mid-bark. But even after the press moved on, Gaines couldn't. There was something that still gnawed at him. The USB drive. He had never figured out who sent it. No fingerprints, no digital trace. The envelope had been mailed from a small town 4 states away. One night, weeks later, he found another envelope on his porch. No name, no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It was of a man in his 40s, smiling, standing in front of a church. In his hand, barely visible, was a dog leash. And attached to the leash was a golden-coated puppy. On the back of the photo were 4 words: "Watch the bishop next." Gaines's heart pounded. Who was sending these? How did they know? And what were they trying to stop? As Rufus looked up at him, tail gently wagging, eyes sharp and knowing, Gaines whispered, "Do you smell it, boy? Because I think we're just getting started." In the days following the funeral, the small town of Elmwood was awash with quiet whispers and nervous glances. The image of the German shepherd, who the townsfolk now knew was named Rex, barking ferociously at the coffin, lingered like a haunting echo. No one could shake the look on the priest's face, how his hands trembled, and how his voice cracked when the question had been asked. Why is the dog barking at the coffin? It wasn't just a random bark. It was a targeted, frenzied cry, as if Rex was trying to tell everyone something very important. "Jason, the man who'd spoken up during the funeral, couldn't let it go. A freelance journalist who had returned home to Elmwood for his uncle's burial, Jason had been known for poking his nose where others told him not to. This time, though, it wasn't about a story. It was about the gnawing feeling in his gut. Something wasn't right. He didn't believe in coincidences, especially not when a dog reacted so violently during a funeral, especially one who had been so calm and quiet before the service. That night, Jason visited the cemetery again. The moonlight spilled over the dew-damp grass like silver tears. He found Rex sitting silently by the grave of Jason's late uncle, Father Gregory Holloway, a priest who had served the community for over 40 years. Rex hadn't moved from the spot since the funeral. It was as if he were keeping vigil or guarding something. Jason approached slowly, crouching beside the dog, offering a slice of leftover roast beef. Rex sniffed it politely, but didn't eat. His eyes, full of something ancient and knowing, stared into Jason's. "I know you're trying to tell me something," Jason murmured, his hand brushing the dog's fur. "But I need help understanding." As if in response, Rex stood and padded a few feet away, glancing back to make sure Jason followed. The dog led him not to the headstone, but behind a nearby mausoleum, an old, crumbling structure rarely visited. There, under a veil of overgrown ivy, Jason found a piece of paper. Curious, he knelt down and pulled it free. It was a torn page from a journal, written in his uncle's handwriting. The passage spoke of guilt, of a secret he could no longer bear, and of a boy whose name was redacted. Jason's breath caught in his throat. Why would his uncle write about guilt? He was a beloved figure, a kind man who everyone trusted. But something in those words chilled him. There was more. He needed to find the rest of that journal. The next day, Jason returned to his uncle's house. The place had already been cleaned out by the church's caretakers, but Jason still had keys. As he sifted through drawers and closets, Rex followed close, almost protectively. Finally, in the attic, Jason discovered a locked trunk. The key, thankfully, was hanging from a rusted nail on the beam above. Inside, wrapped in an old priest's robe, were several journals. Jason sat down and began reading. What he uncovered unraveled everything he thought he knew about his uncle. The journals detailed confessions, ones Father Gregory had never revealed. Years ago, a young boy named Emmett had accused a wealthy church donor of abuse. Gregory, fearing the scandal would destroy the parish, persuaded the boy's family to stay silent. Months later, Emmett went missing. His body was never found. The police ruled it a runaway case, but Father Gregory had always suspected the truth. The donor in question, a man named Charles Burnham, the same man who had died recently and whose funeral had just taken place. That was the coffin Rex had barked at. Jason's hands shook as he realized what this meant. His uncle had officiated the funeral of a man he believed had murdered a child. But why would he do that? Guilt? Duty? Was that what had eaten at him in his final years? Jason turned to Rex. "You knew him. You knew Emmett, didn't you?" Rex's ears twitched. Jason remembered something from the journal, how Emmett had adopted a stray puppy the week before he vanished. A German shepherd. The dates matched. Rex wasn't just any dog. He had belonged to the boy who had cried for help and never been heard. The final journal entry, dated just days before Father Gregory's death, read, "Rex returned. After all these years, he came back. I think he knows what I did, or didn't do. Maybe this is my punishment. Maybe he's waiting for me to confess." Jason's heart pounded. This wasn't just a story. This was a reckoning. The town had buried two men, one of faith and one of supposed generosity. But only one had truly repented, and the dog had remembered it all. He knew what he had to do. Jason gathered the journals and contacted a friend in the local news. But before publishing anything, he reached out to the police. A new investigation was launched into Emmett's disappearance. In the meantime, Rex stayed by Jason's side. The two became inseparable, one chasing truth, the other honoring memory. But something still gnawed at Jason. If Rex had returned to find justice, who had sent him back? Was it instinct or something greater? And the real question that haunted Jason as he prepared for what would become the most shocking expose Elmwood had ever seen. What secret still lies buried beneath the gravestones? And who else is willing to kill to keep it that way?